It was 3 days before my wedding when the woman who was supposed to become my mother-in-law looked me dead in the eye at our rehearsal dinner and said, in front of 65 guests, "My son deserves a partner who understands heritage, not a girl whose mother earns a living scrubbing toilets for my friends." My fiancé froze. When his mother told him to sit back down, he actually did it. I slid off my platinum engagement ring, placed it next to my bone china plate, and walked out. What they didn't know was that I had been holding a quiet promise made to his grandmother on her deathbed for months. They had no idea I had already unraveled the dark financial reality behind their so-called respectable old money family. And they certainly didn't realize that in just 1 week, when I stepped into a boardroom, everything Marguerite Ashford thought she controlled was going to come crashing down. To understand how we got there, we have to go back to where it all began. The rehearsal dinner was held at Magnolia Plantation, a classic pre-war estate in Charleston. It's the kind of venue the local elite use to quietly remind everyone else where they stand. Under chandeliers that cost more than most people's cars, the quiet itself felt heavy with old money. There were 65 guests that night, all dressed in understated designer clothes. The kind that don't need logos to show wealth. I was sitting at the head table between Ston and one of his great-aunts. In the center of the long table was an arrangement of fresh southern magnolias, costing $340 each, according to an invoice I had accidentally seen earlier. Every place setting had a custom menu printed with the Ashford family crest. I learned early on that in families like this, even a meal comes with a reminder of lineage. Marguerite Ashford sat at the head of the table. She was Preston's mother, my future mother-in-law, and a woman who could package arrogance as warmth and condescension as grace. When she smiled at you, it always felt like she was doing you a favor. She stood up to give a toast. I expected standard pleasantries welcoming me to the family. She held her champagne glass with casual precision, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "We are so glad to welcome you all tonight," she began, her tone perfectly polite. Under the table, Preston squeezed my hand. Preston has always had such a generous, forgiving heart. The shift happened in a single pause. It was the kind of moment where the air leaves the room before anyone even speaks. "But I have to be honest," Marguerite continued. Her voice didn't rise. "True authority rarely needs to shout. My son deserves a partner who understands heritage, not a girl whose mother spent her life cleaning houses for some of the people sitting in this very room." The sound of silver cutlery dropping hit the tables. 1, 2, 5, 10 times. Across the hall, people froze mid-bite, mid-sip, mid-breath. Mrs. Adelaide Peaton, a longtime friend of Preston's late grandmother Eleanor, let out an audible gasp 3 seats down. James, Preston's cousin, who'd been quietly sidelined by the family after marrying a man, made a move to stand up in anger, but his husband held his arm back. I felt Preston's hand jerk, as if he wanted to hold on to mine, but then he pulled away completely. 65 people, total silence. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the vibration of a phone 2 tables over. My heart was pounding, but surprisingly my hands remained steady. I turned to look at Preston, not Marguerite. "Preston," I said softly, waiting. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Don't," Marguerite cut him off with firm authority. "Sit down, Preston. The adults are speaking." I watched the moment happen in his eyes. The hesitation, the calculation, and finally, the retreat. He shifted his weight, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. He stayed in his seat. That tiny, harsh sound of wood against the floor was the only detail from that moment that would stay with me forever. Not Marguerite's cruelty, not the uncomfortable silence, but his choice to stay down. My fingers went to the ring on my left hand. A platinum band set with an ancestral diamond worth $47,000 left behind by Eleanor. When Preston proposed with it, he had proudly said his grandmother chose me and had never offered it to anyone else. And Eleanor really had chosen me, just not in the way Preston thought. I slowly pulled the ring off, making sure everyone, especially Marguerite, saw. I set it on the table. Orch. The platinum hit the china with a sharp click, the only sound in a room of 65 people holding their breath. I stood up, looked straight at Marguerite, and kept my voice calm. Mrs. Ashford, my mother showed more dignity cleaning other people's homes than you have shown in your entire life. Then I turned and walked out. It took 47 steps to get from the main table to the front exit. Orch. I counted every single one to keep my posture straight and my hands steady. The valet handed me my keys to my 2019 Honda Civic. Preston had once offered to buy me a nicer car, but I had turned him down. In that moment, I realized why. Deep down, I must have known I would eventually need a way out that belonged entirely to me. My phone started buzzing before I even reached the parking lot exit. Orch. By the time I made it home, there were 17 missed calls. I didn't answer a single one. As I pulled out of the estate, I saw Preston in my rearview mirror. He had run out to the gate, watching my taillights fade into the night. But he didn't get into his car to follow me. He was never the kind of person to stand up when it mattered. Orch. Just past 10 p.m., I arrived back at my one-bedroom apartment in North Charleston. It was modest, costing $1,150 a month, but it was mine, paid for entirely with my salary from First Light without a single cent from his family. I didn't cry, which surprised me. Orch. I thought I would fall apart, but instead, I just made a cup of Earl Grey tea, hot, the way my mother always made it when things were tough. I sat at the kitchen table and pulled a manila folder out of my safe. I had been keeping it for 2 months. The label read, Ashford Foundation Records. Orch. Inside were 340 pages of bank statements, fabricated consulting invoices, and board minutes detailing how Marguerite had voted down scholarship applications from students she claimed were unqualified. It was an overwhelming trail of financial misconduct, from a woman who believed she was entirely above accountability. I had been preparing for this. Orch. I hadn't wanted it to end this way, but I was ready. On my desk sat a photo of Eleanor Ashford and me, taken 2 years earlier at a scholarship dinner. Back then, I was just a grateful past recipient, and she was a kind elderly woman who remembered my college essay. That was before I knew what she would eventually ask me to do, and before I understood why she had chosen me. Orch. I looked at that picture for a long time. Then my phone rang. The caller ID read James Ashford. I picked up. James. Alex, his voice was tense, breathing heavily. Are you okay? I wanted to drive over, but Daniel said I should call first. Tonight was terrible. I don't even know what to say. I'm fine. That wasn't fine, that was. He paused. I'm so sorry. I should have said something. Orch. I should have stopped her. You tried, I said quietly. I saw your husband stopped you. He went silent. I could hear a car engine in the background. He was calling from his vehicle. Alex, listen. You need to know this. Right after you left, Marguerite called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. She's moving to remove you from the foundation board. Orch. I had anticipated this. Part of my plan counted on her taking drastic steps. On what grounds? She's claiming Eleanor wasn't of sound mind when she appointed you. She says you took advantage of an elderly woman. He hesitated. She's also going to court for a restraining order, claiming you used your relationship with Preston to get access to foundation funds. I checked the time. 11:47 p.m. Orch. James, I asked calmly, when did Eleanor pass away? A confused silence followed. June 18th. Why? Eleanor appointed me to the board on April 22nd, 2 months before she died, I said firmly, sticking to the facts. She was completely lucid. The family attorney, Jeffrey Sterling, witnessed it. Orch. Her oncologist and an independent psychiatrist both provided written evaluations confirming her mental capacity. I heard James catch his breath. Your aunt doesn't have the authority to remove me, James. Under the foundation bylaws, she can't do it without cause and a unanimous board vote. And I have something Marguerite doesn't know exists. What? Orch. Her mother-in-law's final statements preserved in legally binding documentation. Alex, what are you going to do? I looked at the documents, at Eleanor's photo, and at the evidence of how Marguerite had diverted resources meant for underprivileged students. I'm going to finish what Eleanor asked me to do. After hanging up, I didn't sleep. I sat at my laptop and drafted an email. The timestamp showed it was sent on November 28, 2025, at 12:33 a.m. Subject: Ashford Foundation Board Emergency Meeting. Notice of fiduciary misconduct and financial irregularities. Body: Pursuant to Article 6, Section 3 of the Ashford Foundation Bylaws, I hereby call an emergency board meeting to address serious fiduciary breaches and financial irregularities. Time: December 9, 2025 at 10 a.m. Location: First Light Offices, 340 Meeting Street, Charleston. Attendance is required for all directors under Article 6. Section 5. Supporting documents are attached. Alexandra Pritchard, Board Member. 72 hours notice, strictly adhering to the bylaws. Clear, legal, and formal. I copied all 11 board members, Family Attorney Jeffrey Sterling, IRS Special Agent Rebecca Thornton, South Carolina Assistant Attorney General Daniel Fletcher, and William Porter, the lead investigative reporter at the Charleston Post and Courier. The attachment was 47.8 megabytes. 340 pages of documented evidence. I hit send at 12:33 a.m. The printer in the corner hummed to life, starting the process of printing 23 physical copies, one for every person who would sit in that meeting room. My coffee maker was set for 5:30 a.m. I didn't get into bed until 3 a.m. My phone buzzed again with a text from Preston. Alex, please, I'm so sorry. Can we talk? I read it, left it unanswered, and deleted it. Some conversations were no longer necessary. Before the meeting took place, it helps to understand how a girl whose mother cleaned houses ended up holding the evidence that could dismantle one of Charleston's oldest families. It started with a letter in June 2015. I was 17 and graduating high school. My father had passed away in a work accident 2 years earlier without life insurance. My mother was working 3 jobs, including one with a cleaning company called Spotless Solutions, spending her days maintaining grand homes for wealthy families who never learned her name. The letter arrived on stationery bearing the First Light emblem, simple lighthouse logo. It read, "Congratulations, you have been selected as a First Light Scholar." This award covers full tuition for 4 years, plus $28,000 annually, funded by the Ashford Foundation. 2 weeks earlier, I had been accepted into Yale, but I was planning to defer because we simply didn't have the money. When I read the letter to my mother, she wept. She held the paper with hands worn rough from years of cleaning products. It was the first time I had seen her cry like that since my father's funeral. "I am so proud of you, my daughter," she whispered. "Your father would be so proud." At the time, I had no idea that the woman signing those scholarship checks would trust me with the truth about her family's foundation. I didn't even know who Eleanor Ashford was. I didn't meet her in person until December 2023, after I had graduated from Yale and returned to Charleston to serve as executive director of First Light, the very organization that had changed my life 8 years earlier. We were at the annual fundraising gala at the Francis Marion Hotel. I spoke on a panel about first-generation student success. It was a standard charity event meant to share inspiring stories with donors. After the panel, an elderly woman in a wheelchair approached me. She was 91, with sharp eyes, wearing a handwritten name tag that read, E. Ashford, founder, Eleanor Ashford. "You were the 2015 scholar, weren't you?" she asked, her voice surprisingly strong. "I remember your application essay. You wrote about your father's hands." I was amazed she remembered, given how many students the foundation had funded over the decades. "Yes, ma'am, he was a mechanic." She smiled, a genuine expression, rather than the polite formality typical of these events. "Would you join me for coffee next week?" she asked. "There's something I'd like to discuss." "Of course," I replied. You don't turn down the person who made your education possible. But I had no idea what she was planning to ask. On January 8, 2024, we met at Kudu Coffee on King Street, a casual spot Eleanor specifically chose so I would feel comfortable. She ordered black coffee, just like I did. She got straight to the point, letting me know she had been diagnosed with advanced pancreatic cancer and had limited time left. Her family didn't know yet. She wanted to talk about the foundation's future. She asked probing questions about Marguerite, who was managing day-to-day operations. My daughter-in-law handles things now. Do you work with her often? I kept my answer professional. We submit grant requests. Mrs. Ashford maintains very thorough review procedures. Eleanor gave me a sharp look. That's a very diplomatic answer. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for her cup, a detail we both noticed. My time is short, she said, so I'll be direct. I need to know if you're as brave as you were when you wrote that college essay. I stayed silent, listening. She leaned forward slightly. Because I need someone who isn't afraid to stand up. And I think that person might be you. That was where it all began. The decisive conversation happened 2 months later, on March 15, 2025, in Eleanor's private study at the family estate on South Battery. The house had an imposing presence, filled with history and family portraits spanning generations. Eleanor was visibly weaker by then, relying on an oxygen tank. She dismissed her nurse before we spoke. Behind her heavy mahogany desk, the same desk her husband, Samuel Ashford, had used when establishing the endowment back in 1875, hung photos of past scholars. My own picture from the 2015 dinner was there, placed alongside dozens of others. Eleanor handed me a manila folder. I've known for 18 months that Marguerite has been diverting funds from the foundation, she stated clearly. I hired a private investigator. Here is the documentation. I opened the folder to find bank records, large wire transfers, and registration papers for 4 offshore shell companies. The figures were substantial. Mrs. Ashford, this is nearly $5 million. $4,832,000 to be exact, Eleanor corrected. Diverted from funds intended for students who need financial support. I looked at her. Tears were silently tracing down her face. Why haven't you reported this to the authorities? I asked. Because I was afraid, she said candidly. I couldn't bear the thought of a scandal dismantling everything my husband built. The foundation does genuine good. If I exposed Marguerite publicly, donors would pull back, the board would panic, and Samuel's legacy would fall apart. What do you want me to do? She pulled out a thinner folder containing 6 notarized letters. I am appointing you to the foundation board next month. Marguerite will assume it's just a sentimental gesture from a dying woman and won't contest it. What she won't know is that I'm legally granting you veto power over any expenditure exceeding $500,000. Nor does she know these letters exist. What's in them? A record, Eleanor explained. I will confront Marguerite directly about the missing funds and document her responses. My psychiatrist will sign each record as a witness to confirm my mental clarity. After I'm gone, these records belong to you. She looked at me intently. I don't have the strength left to handle this, Alexandra, but you do. Will you finish this for me? I thought of my father's hard work, my mother's quiet sacrifices, and the moment I opened my acceptance letter at 17. If I do this, I said slowly, it means ending things with Preston. She held my hand tightly. If you don't, hundreds of students lose their opportunities. Which matters more? I knew the answer. I'll do it, I said. Eleanor passed away on June 18, 2025. The family held a private funeral, but 4 days later, a public memorial was held at the Cathedral of St. Luke and St. Paul. Over 300 people attended, surrounded by white roses, her favorite flower. Marguerite delivered the eulogy, speaking at length about Eleanor's dedication to charitable causes and her lasting legacy. I sat near the back, the manila folder secured in my bag, knowing that her true legacy would indeed continue, just not in the way Marguerite envisioned. After the service, Jeffrey Sterling, the family's long-serving attorney, handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from Eleanor dated 8 days before her death. Finish what I could not. I trust you. E.A. I kept that note with me every day following. To explain how I had already been looking into the foundation before Eleanor approached me. Back in January 2025, the Southern Educational Justice Coalition, a nonprofit oversight initiative I co-founded under a pen name in 2021, received an anonymous email at 3:47 a.m. from an untraceable address. The message urged us to examine the Ashford Foundation's rejection records from 2019 to 2024, citing irregular patterns in financial distributions and scholar selections, specifically highlighting applicants with top-tier academic standing and high financial need. After reviewing the tip, I knew I had to maintain strict legal protocol. While I offered to recuse myself, my co-founder pointed out that my access to public filings through First Light made it possible to verify the facts objectively. We instituted formal conflict of interest protocols and legal oversight to ensure every step of our inquiry was completely transparent and unassailable. It took 3 weeks to trace the financial patterns. Using publicly available Form 990 tax documents from 2019 through 2024, I reviewed the Foundation's $340 million asset base and its reported $4.2 million in annual scholarships. The discrepancies emerged in Schedule O. Over 6 years, $2.1 million had been paid out as consulting fees to 4 entities: Ashford Consulting Solutions, Heritage Advisors Group, Palmetto Strategy Partners, and Low Country Management LLC. All 4 were registered in Delaware under the same agent, with no public web presence or listed employees. They had all been incorporated within the same 6-month window in 2019, with payments authorized directly by Marguerite as Foundation Chair. Working with legal counsel, we tracked the paper trail. The payments routed through these entities ultimately settled into a single personal account under Marguerite R. Ashford at First Citizens Bank. Beyond the numbers, the impact fell on the applicants. I interviewed 12 of the high-achieving students who had been turned away despite exemplary qualifications. Many had been forced to alter their educational plans significantly due to missing financial support. Among them was Jasmine Rodriguez, a student with a 4.0 GPA and stellar test scores who was rejected in 2021 with a generic form letter citing shifting organizational priorities. She was working full-time instead of attending her dream university. Sitting with those records showed me the real cost of the diverted funds. The notarized letters Eleanor left behind completed the picture. Jeffrey Sterling delivered them a week after the memorial. Among them, a letter dated April 8 detailed a conversation where Eleanor directly confronted Marguerite with bank statements. Marguerite had dismissed the warning, assuming Eleanor's declining health would prevent any formal action before the Foundation fully passed to her control. Reading that letter in my apartment, I saw how isolated Eleanor had felt, trying to protect the Foundation's purpose while facing pressure from within her own family. By July 2025, the evidence was complete, establishing clear breaches of fiduciary duty, state nonprofit regulations, and federal tax laws. The only remaining complication was that I was still engaged to Preston Ashford. We started dating in August of 2023, and he proposed in October of 2024. The wedding was set for November 29, 2025. I loved him. That was the most painful part of all this. I loved him, but I was about to hand over the evidence that would send his mother to federal prison and completely shatter his family's reputation. During the summer leading up to everything, I kept a journal, a private journal, tucked away where nobody could find it. I spent night after night working through the exact same moral dilemma. On August 14, 2025, I wrote, Preston proposed because he loves the version of me he has in his head. Kind, forgiving, understanding. If I actually go through with this plan, he is going to see who I really am. A woman who is cold, uncompromising, and willing to tear everything down for absolute accountability. Is he still going to love the real me? Or, even worse, do I even care if he does? Orch. 14 different times that summer, I almost told him the truth. 14 distinct moments where the words, "Your mother is stealing money," meant for underprivileged kids, were right on the tip of my tongue. Every single time, I swallowed them back down. I knew that once those words left my mouth, there would be no turning back. Before I said anything, I had to know one crucial thing. Orch. I needed to see how Preston reacted in a real crisis. Was he someone who would stand up and do the right thing, or would he just take the easy way out? So I came up with a plan. The rehearsal dinner was going to be my test. Orch. If Margaret attacked me in front of everyone, which I knew was only a matter of time, and Preston stood his ground, backed me up, and chose me over her, I would tell him everything that night. We would handle it together and save the foundation side by side. But if he froze up, if his mother told him to sit down and he just caved like a coward, then I would have my answer. Orch. To make sense of all this, you have to understand how we met in the first place. On August 19, 2023, the Morningstar Scholars hosted their annual 5K charity run along the Charleston waterfront. I had an intensely stressful week at work, so I went to run off some steam. Preston was there running completely on his own, without any family entourage. Orch. He was wearing basic workout clothes with no designer logos anywhere, looking nothing like someone raised in old money. Around the 2-mile mark, we bumped into each other at a water station. We both reached for the exact same paper cup at the exact same time. We both burst out laughing, and just like that, we started talking. He introduced himself as Cole. Orch. Only later did I find out that was actually his middle name. When I asked him what he did, he told me he was an architect working on affordable housing projects. He even added that it probably sounded boring. I looked him straight in the eye and told him it wasn't boring at all. It was deeply important work. Orch. He smiled like I had just handed him something priceless, telling me I was the very first person who had ever said that to him. We swapped numbers, and 4 days later, we had our first official date over coffee at Kutu Coffee, the exact same spot where Eleanor would later ask to meet me. For the first 6 months of our relationship, I had zero clue he was an Ashford. He only went by Cole. Orch. He drove a 2021 Subaru Outback that he bought with his own money, strictly refusing to touch his family trust fund for luxury cars. He was thoughtful, attentive, and completely grounded. Whenever I talked about Morningstar Scholars, the students from low-income families, and how education truly changes lives, he listened with absolute focus. Orch. I fell hard for him because he seemed completely different from all the arrogant, wealthy men I constantly ran into through my work. He was real. By February 2024, 6 months into dating, he invited me over to meet his parents. When that Subaru pulled up in front of the massive Greek Revival mansion on South Battery Street, my stomach dropped. Orch. It was a 7,200 square foot estate built in 1842. Valued at nearly $9 million. That exact address had appeared at the top of the Ashford Foundation's official letterhead countless times. I turned to him with a knot in my throat and asked him what his last name actually was. He looked completely confused and said, "Ashford. Preston Cole Ashford. I thought you already knew." Orch. I told him his family's foundation had paid for my entire 4 years of college tuition. His eyes lit up with excitement. He told me it was incredible, like something straight out of fate. I forced a small smile and agreed, but inside, every single alarm bell was ringing. I had fallen in love with the sole heir to the charitable foundation, where I was set to become executive director. Orch. At that point, I had no idea his mother was a criminal. That family dinner was deeply unsettling. The massive formal dining table was set for 12, but only 4 of us were sitting there. Me, Preston, Margaret, and his father, Harrison. Margaret was polite, but it was a cold, calculated kind of politeness, the exact tone someone uses when interviewing entry-level staff. Orch. She gave a tight smile and remarked that putting myself through Yale on scholarships showed real resourcefulness. Then she turned to Preston and mentioned that he had never mentioned Alexandra coming from such humble beginnings. Preston completely missed the jab. He chimed in, saying I had earned my spot at Yale all on my own, and that it was an incredible achievement. Orch. Margaret slowly cut her steak and replied that people in their position always loved a touching story about a scholarship recipient beating the odds. That night, dessert was served on fine china carrying the Ashford family crest, paired with a $340 bottle of 2015 Bordeaux. Orch. Meanwhile, I was wearing a borrowed dress, because nothing in my closet came close to fitting in with old money formal dinners. On the drive back, Preston said he thought the evening went really well. I just agreed, but deep down, I knew better. Margaret had written me off the second she set eyes on me. Orch. What I didn't realize back then was just how far she would go to prove I wasn't worthy of her son. On October 12, 2024, Preston proposed at White Point Garden in the Battery. The sun was setting, and it was just the two of us. It was simple, genuine, and completely his style, with none of his family's usual over-the-top drama. The ring had belonged to Eleanor. Orch. Preston had asked for his grandmother's blessing before she got sick. It was a platinum band featuring a 2.3-carat diamond that Eleanor had worn since 1953. He got down on one knee and told me he didn't care about his family's money or their famous last name. He said the only thing that mattered was me, and asked if I would marry him. Orch. I said yes because I loved him, and because at that point I still had no idea what his mother had been doing behind closed doors. The very next day, Margaret called and asked him to bring me over for lunch so we could go over wedding plans. That single lunch meeting kicked off a complete nightmare. From January through November of 2025, I was essentially living two completely separate lives. Orch. In January, I uncovered the paper trail showing financial fraud. In March, Eleanor gave me the green light to fight back. In June, Eleanor passed away. By July, I had finished gathering all the evidence and had every legal step mapped out. Yet behind the scenes, the wedding preparations kept moving forward like an absurd show. Orch. 8 endless meetings covering venues, catering, florists, photographers, bands, and invitations. Margaret took over every single detail, arrogance intact, overruling every single choice I tried to make. She personally selected Magnolia Plantation for the rehearsal dinner, dropping a total budget of $62,000. By day, I smiled and sampled wedding cakes. Orch. By night, I sat at my computer organizing the exact financial records that proved she had been siphoning off funds. 14 times I almost told Preston everything. 14 times the words were right there, but I had to hold back. I needed to see what he would do when everything hit the fan. Would he stand by me, or would he cave to his mother? Orch. On November 21st, just 6 days before the rehearsal dinner, Margaret did something unprecedented. She called me directly. She said she had a private matter to discuss and asked to meet for coffee the following day. We met at Peninsula Grill, an excessively fancy place where the servers wore full tuxedos. It certainly wasn't my choice of spot. She didn't waste a second. Orch. She offered me $200,000 to quietly walk away, call off the engagement, and disappear from Preston's life for good. She said it completely flatly, as if she were bargaining for a used car. She suggested I use the money to pay off student loans, give my mother a better life, and start fresh somewhere else. Orch. She added that Preston would be heartbroken for a bit, but he would move on soon enough, noting that the sum was more than I would make in 5 years at my job. I didn't even have student loans. I had worked tirelessly and paid off every cent by 2022. I looked her dead in the eye and told her I was not leaving Preston. The smirk left her face completely. Orch. She warned me that I was going to regret staying. I stood up. The entire interaction took just 11 minutes. I told her I would see her at the rehearsal dinner and walked out. To me, it was a declaration of war. To her, it sounded like an empty threat. In a way, she wasn't wrong. Orch. The night of the rehearsal dinner, after I pulled off my ring, walked out of the plantation, and drove home, James called to warn me that Margaret was planning an emergency board meeting the next morning to strip me of my position. Sitting at my dining table, I finally took the action I had spent months preparing for. At 12:33 a.m., I hit send. Orch. The subject line read, Emergency Ashford Foundation Board Meeting. Breach of fiduciary duty and financial irregularities. I gave the mandatory 72-hour notice, scheduling the meeting for December 9th at 10 a.m. Location, my office, not her turf. My home court. Orch. I CC'd everyone needed to hold her legally accountable. The full board of directors, the family lawyer, IRS agents, the assistant attorney general, and the press. Attached was a 47.8 megabyte file of rock-solid evidence. Read receipts started popping up on my screen over the next few hours. Jeffrey Sterling read it at 1:14 a.m. Board member Dr. Helen Cartwright read it at 6:47 a.m. Orch. Margaret Ashford opened it at 7:02 a.m. I could picture her face the moment she opened that email. Seeing the endless CC list, noticing the massive file attached, and finally realizing I was never the timid, easily manipulated girl she thought she could steamroll. Every bit of composure on her carefully maintained face must have completely collapsed. But Margaret wasn't going down without a fight. Orch. She tried to strike back. On November 28th at 9 a.m., she tried to run her own emergency board meeting, the very one she had planned before my email went out. But only 4 loyalists showed up. Jeffrey Sterling, the family attorney, was there too. But he wasn't representing Margaret. He was carrying out Eleanor's final wishes. Orch. Jeffrey calmly read through the legal stance, stating he had written documentation from 3 separate medical professionals confirming Eleanor was fully of sound mind when she appointed me to the board. He also presented Eleanor's direct instructions. My appointment could not be revoked without a unanimous vote or proven legal cause, neither of which Margaret had. Orch. Margaret's face went dead white before flushing deep red. She demanded I be removed from the board immediately. Jeffrey closed his folder and flatly told her she didn't have the authority. That meeting lasted a total of 14 minutes before being legally shut down. Next, Margaret took it to court. Orch. That very afternoon at 2 p.m., her high-priced white-collar defense attorney, Bradford Hayes, filed for an emergency injunction. She wanted a judge to block my December 9th meeting, claiming serious conflicts of interest due to my engagement to Preston, along with accusations of defamation and fabricated financial claims. The emergency hearing was set for December 2nd. Orch. At 4:17 p.m. that day, court papers totaling 28 pages were served at my office. Charleston County Court of Common Pleas. Case number 2025 CP1086629. I read through every single line, made one single phone call, and reached IRS agent Rebecca Thornton. December 2nd, the day of the injunction hearing. Margaret's lawyer spent his time ranting about my conflict of interest. Orch. My attorney, Sarah Mendez, from the South Carolina Environmental Law Center, working pro bono, laid out the facts for the judge. I had fully disclosed my relationship according to protocol, recused myself from any decisions involving Preston's interests, and held an unquestionable fiduciary duty as a board member to report financial wrongdoing. Orch. The presiding judge was Patricia Simmons, known across the legal community for zero-tolerance policy regarding frivolous motions that wasted the court's time. Right on cue, IRS agent Thornton stood up from the gallery. She presented her federal credentials and stated that the United States government strongly opposed the injunction. Orch. She explained that the meeting I called involved crucial evidence tied directly to an ongoing federal criminal investigation, and stopping it would constitute obstruction of justice. She added that formal subpoenas had already been issued to the foundation, meaning the meeting had to proceed as scheduled. Judge Simmons looked at Margaret's attorney like he had completely lost his mind. She questioned Mr. Hayes on whether his client was seriously trying to use her court to block an accountability meeting attended by active federal investigators, then promptly denied the motion. The entire hearing took 31 minutes flat. The judge ruled right there on the spot, with written orders following shortly after. Walking down the courthouse steps, I spotted Preston. He had been sitting in the very back row watching the whole thing. Our eyes met on the steps. He looked at me and mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." I looked away and walked straight to my car. At that point, an apology was nowhere near enough. During the week leading up to the December 9th board meeting, things shifted in unexpected ways. Allies began stepping forward. James called first, telling me he was in my corner for whatever I needed. Then Harrison, Preston's father, asked to speak with me in private. On December 5th, we met at Kudu Coffee, the exact location where Eleanor had once asked if I was brave enough for what was coming. Harrison looked like he had aged 10 years in a single week, unshaved and completely exhausted. Without any small talk, he admitted he had known what Margaret was doing for 3 years. He confessed he had been too weak to put a stop to it, adding that his mother had been completely right to choose me. He offered to testify in court if I needed him to. When I asked him why he was doing this now, he said that watching his son's face at the rehearsal dinner made him realize he had raised Preston to be a coward, and he refused to take that kind of shame to his grave. Next came a call from Dr. Helen Cartwright, a veteran board member in her 70s. As a Black woman who spent her career leading nonprofits, she had dedicated her life to educational equity. She shared that Eleanor had called her shortly before passing away. That conversation had lasted 47 minutes. Eleanor had walked her through the plan, saying she had finally found someone brave enough to end the corruption. Dr. Cartwright told me she believed in me and promised her vote would be behind me. By the night of December 8th, I had everything required to expose Margaret completely. Undeniable financial paper trails, turned insiders, solid backing from federal authorities, and one final, decisive piece of evidence. It was the final letter written by Eleanor on June 10, 2025. It stated that I was braver than anyone in her family and urged me to finish what needed to be done. December 9th was the day of reckoning. I arrived at the Morningstar Scholars office at 7 a.m. sharp to set up the room. Along the main conference table, I arranged 23 chairs, 23 thick evidence binders, fresh water pitchers, and extra pens. On the surrounding walls hung photos of past scholarship recipients, 156 young faces whose lives had been turned around by the program. Right alongside them, I deliberately placed 12 specific photos of students Margaret had unfairly rejected, including Jasmine Rodriguez. 12 stolen futures. I wore a basic navy J. Crew suit that cost me $240, far from anything designer. My hair was pulled back into a simple low bun, no makeup. I wanted to look exactly like who I was. The girl who made her way up through hard work and scholarships. I wanted Margaret to see me clearly and remember the exact person she had completely underestimated. At 9:47 a.m., people began filing in. IRS agent Rebecca Thornton arrived first, wearing a crisp trench coat, looking completely professional and ready. Right behind her was South Carolina Assistant Attorney General Daniel Fletcher, representing the State Charitable Fraud Division. Jeffrey Sterling entered carrying a worn leather briefcase older than I was. Board members trickled in, looking visibly uncomfortable, whispering among themselves. William Porter from the Charleston Post and Courier arrived with a heavy camera bag and a notepad tucked under his arm. At 9:58 a.m., Margaret made her entrance. She showed up 3 minutes late on purpose, a classic old money flex meant to project total control over the room. She walked in with her head held high, expecting a routine meeting she could easily dominate and control. Instead, she walked into a packed room of 23 people. Federal badges gleaming, media cameras pointed straight at her, Jeffrey sitting at one end of the table, and me at the other. Torch. Her composure crumbled in real time. Complete shock, intense anger, and finally a desperate attempt to put her confident facade back on. She stared down Jeffrey and demanded to know what was going on. Jeffrey calmly explained that it was a special board meeting legally called by Miss Pritchard, properly noticed 11 days prior. Torch. She snapped back that she refused to participate in the entire circus and turned to leave. Jeffrey didn't even flinch, reminding her that foundation bylaws required her attendance, and walking out would constitute a direct breach of fiduciary duty, prompting immediate removal proceedings. Torch. She froze at the door, gritted her teeth, and was forced to take a seat at the far end of the table, as far from me as possible. At 10:04 a.m., Preston walked in behind her. He didn't sit with his mother, nor did he sit near me. He took a seat right in the middle, still trying to find balance between two different worlds. I stood up. Torch. I formally called the Ashford Foundation board meeting to order, speaking clearly and steadily as my voice echoed in the quiet room. I asked the secretary to record attendance. I skipped any emotional build-up and went straight to the raw numbers. I laid out that between 2019 and 2024, the Ashford Foundation rejected 156 qualified applicants, 87% of whom were students of color. During that exact time frame, $4.8 million was siphoned out of foundation accounts and funneled into shell companies controlled by a single individual. I turned on the projector, bringing up the first slide. It was an old photo from the 2018 Scholarship Gala, showing Eleanor Ashford surrounded by smiling students, her face full of hope. Torch. I stated that we were going to review every piece of evidence before taking a formal board vote on next steps. Margaret slammed her hand on the table, interrupting me, calling it flat-out slander, and moving to adjourn the meeting immediately. Under standard board rules, any motion required a second to proceed to a vote. Torch. Without missing a beat, I looked at the room and asked if there was a second for her motion. Total, deafening silence. Nobody said a word. Not a single hand went up. Margaret looked around the table in complete disbelief as former loyalists deliberately avoided her gaze. I formally noted that the motion failed for lack of a second and continued with the presentation. I brought up Exhibit A, bank statements from First Citizens Bank, for Margaret Ashford's personal checking account, showing total deposits of over $2.1 million between 2019 and 2024. I projected every statement onto the screen, letting the numbers speak for themselves. Next came Exhibit B, Delaware Shell Company registrations set up through Corporate Service Company. 4 separate entities created within a 6-month window in 2019. Ashford Consulting Solutions, Heritage Advisory Group, Palmetto Strategy Partners, and Low Country Management LLC. All 4 funneled money straight back into Margaret's personal bank account. Then came Exhibit C. Fake consulting invoices showing charges like $127,000 for strategic planning and $89,000 for advisory fees, all completely lacking supporting documentation or deliverables. There were no actual consultants. It was just Margaret using funds meant for education to finance a luxury lifestyle. IRS Agent Thornton stood up and presented her federal badge. She put it on the record that the IRS had confirmed these transfers qualified as self-dealing under Section 4941 of the Internal Revenue Code. Beyond massive excise tax penalties, formal criminal proceedings were being initiated. Assistant Attorney General Fletcher added that South Carolina law strictly prohibited self-dealing by nonprofit executives, and the State Attorney General's office was reviewing the case for formal fraud charges. A few audible gasps echoed around the table. Thomas Whitmore, a distant Ashford relative on the board, looked pale, stood up, and walked straight out of the room. Margaret's voice began to tremble, but she tried to push back, claiming those payments were legitimate consulting fees for outside experts hired to grow the foundation. I asked her directly if she could produce a single report submitted by these so-called experts. She stammered that the information was proprietary business information. I pointed out that no reports existed because there were no experts, just her converting tuition and textbook money into Chanel suits and first-class flights to Europe. Then came Exhibit D, the list of rejected students. I projected a spreadsheet listing 156 names with average GPAs of 3.87 and average SAT scores of 1420, 87% of whom were minority applicants, all systematically turned down. I then displayed subpoenaed internal emails from March 2021, where Margaret explicitly instructed review staff to focus on applicants reflecting traditional family values, prioritizing background over diversity targets. Sitting 3 seats away, Dr. Helen Cartwright began silently crying, letting tears run down her face without bothering to wipe them away. In the back of the room, William Porter's camera shutter clicked repeatedly. I pointed out that these students deserved those scholarships and the funds were available. Instead of going to universities, $4.8 million was redirected to shell companies to fund one person's extravagant lifestyle, crushing countless futures in the process. Finally, I presented the final piece of evidence. I brought up the notarized letters Eleanor Ashford had left in her final months, witnessed by her personal attorney and primary physician, with explicit instructions to make them public, if necessary. The screen displayed Eleanor's recognizable, slightly shaky handwriting from April 8, 2025. I read her words aloud, detailing how Eleanor had confronted Margaret about the shell companies with bank statements in hand. Margaret hadn't even denied it. Instead, she taunted Eleanor, saying nobody would believe an aging woman, that calling the police would destroy the family legacy, and pointing out that since Eleanor was dying anyway, everything would soon belong to her regardless. The room fell completely silent, save for Dr. Cartwright's quiet crying. I read 2 more letters, each one more damning than the last. It was a voice from beyond the grave, calling out the corruption with total clarity. When I finished reading, I looked Margaret straight in the eye. I told the room that Eleanor loved the foundation more than anyone, and couldn't bear to see it ruined, which was why she asked me to step up and clear out the corruption. I stated that I was standing there to finish what Eleanor started. Following protocol, I opened the floor for Margaret to defend herself. She tried attacking my motives, claiming it was all bitter revenge from a woman whose engagement was called off, insisting my background made me unfit for their family. Agent Thornton cut her off, asking point-blank if she denied the physical bank transfers took place. Margaret scrambled, claiming the foundation needed advisory services, and paid for them. When pressed for a single tangible deliverable, she stumbled over her words, claiming strategic guidance wasn't something she needed to prove to anyone. Her own lawyer leaned in and urgently warned her to stop talking immediately. She completely lost control, shouting that nobody understood what it took to maintain a family legacy of their stature, and that sacrifices had to be made. She froze mid-sentence, realizing exactly what she had just blurted out in front of federal agents and recording devices. Assistant Attorney General Fletcher looked up from his notes, asking her to clarify if she just referred to denying qualified students their education as a necessary sacrifice for her family's image. Margaret bolted upright, pale as a sheet, declaring she had to leave. Jeffrey Sterling's cold voice stopped her, informing her that she wasn't going anywhere until the board vote was completed. She collapsed back into her chair like a popped balloon, her hands shaking uncontrollably as her untouchable persona completely fell apart. I brought the motions to the floor. I moved for 4 immediate actions. First, the immediate suspension of Margaret Ashford from all foundation roles. Second, authorization for an independent forensic audit. Third, full cooperation with IRS and Attorney General investigations. And fourth, the reinstatement of scholarship opportunities for wrongfully rejected applicants as funding allowed. I called for a show of hands. Hands went up around the table. Dr. Cartwright, James, Harrison, Jeffrey, and 4 other board members, 8 votes in favor. I asked for those opposed. Margaret raised her hand along with 2 conservative loyalists, 3 votes against. I announced the motion passed 8-3, confirming Margaret was officially suspended, and requested she turn over all foundation credit cards, keys, and account credentials to Mr. Sterling before leaving. Margaret stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. She grabbed her designer bag and stumbled toward the exit. Right at the doorway, she stopped, turned around, and glared at me with absolute fury. She didn't say a word, but her face said everything. I met her glare with absolute composure, completely unfazed. My only real regret was not doing it sooner. She turned and left. The sharp click of her heels on the stairs grew quieter and quieter until it faded into total silence. From the back of the room, reporter William Porter spoke up, asking if they could start taking questions. I told him we needed to handle internal board business first and would address the press outside afterward. Our meeting continued for another 20 minutes. We hashed out the logistics, chose a top-tier forensic auditing firm to go through the books, and discussed bringing in an interim president to stabilize the organization. Harrison stepped forward and offered to take the temporary position. He promised to resign from every single one of his corporate board seats immediately to eliminate any conflict of interest, stating it was the only way he could even begin to redeem himself. That was when Preston spoke up for the very first time during the entire meeting. He stood up, his voice raspy and choking back tears, and apologized to the board, to the rejected students, and to me. He turned to me, looking deep into my eyes. He said that when he should have stood up, he caved and chose to sit down instead, adding that he would regret that decision for the rest of his life. He then officially handed in his resignation from the board, stating he no longer deserved a seat at that table. I kept my expression entirely neutral, informing him that the board would vote on his resignation at the next meeting. But right now, we still had work to finish. He nodded quietly and sank back into his chair. At 11:22 a.m., the meeting officially adjourned after running for an hour and 22 minutes. As the board members filed out, several stopped to shake my hand. Dr. Cartwright pulled me into a tight hug, crying softly against my shoulder. Harrison pulled me aside privately to thank me for giving him a chance to do the right thing, even if it was long overdue. Through the glass windows of the conference room, I could see Preston pacing anxiously outside. Agent Thornton walked over and tapped my arm, complimenting the work and reminding me that they would need my official testimony when formal charges were filed. I quietly replied that I was just keeping a promise. When I stepped outside the building, the media had completely swarmed the entrance. 6 reporters and 3 news cameras with flashing red recording lights were waiting. I delivered a brief, official statement. The Ashford Foundation Board had voted to suspend the current president pending further investigation, was fully cooperating with law enforcement, and was committed to restoring scholarships for affected students as quickly as possible. I shut down any questions regarding Margaret personally, stating that was strictly up to federal investigators, and brushed off questions about Preston, keeping that firmly as a private matter. William Porter shouted out a question, asking if my personal engagement to Margaret's son had influenced my internal investigation. I looked straight into the camera lens and stated that I had formally disclosed the relationship months prior, recused myself from all relevant decisions as required by law, and that my primary duty was to the Foundation's charitable mission and Eleanor Ashford's final wishes, both of which I had fulfilled. When asked if I was still going to marry Preston, I simply called for the next question. Over the 9-minute press conference, I answered 14 questions total, short, professional, and completely bulletproof. As the press began to clear out, I turned to head back inside. Preston was standing about 10 feet away, having clearly overheard everything. Our eyes locked once again. I gave a slight shake of my head without saying a word and walked straight through the heavy glass doors as they closed behind me, sealing us into two entirely different worlds. The media coverage hit far harder than I anticipated. By 6:14 p.m. that evening, the Charleston Post and Courier broke the story on their homepage. Ashford Foundation president suspended amid massive fraud allegations. By midnight, the Associated Press, the New York Times, and the Washington Post picked up the story. By noon the next day, it was running across NPR's Morning Edition, CNN, and Fox News. An NPR host reported that the historic foundation, long considered a symbol of Charleston royalty, was facing severe allegations after its sitting president was accused of diverting nearly $5 million in scholarship funds. Adding that during a dramatic board meeting, her son's fiancé presented damning evidence gathered with the help of the late founder to put an end to years of corruption. Over the next 48 hours, I received 67 interview requests. I turned every single one down. The Morning Star Scholar's official website crashed twice due to an unprecedented surge in traffic. People from all over the country were leaving messages offering donations, looking to help rebuild everything Margaret had destroyed. On December 11th, Margaret's lawyer issued a weak public statement claiming she maintained total innocence, writing off any accounting discrepancies as minor bookkeeping errors, and insisting she would be fully exonerated in court. That same day, the IRS officially announced a formal criminal investigation. On December 15th at 7:18 a.m., FBI agents assisting the IRS surrounded the Ashford estate on South Battery Street. Armed with a federal warrant, they arrested Margaret on the spot, charging her with 13 federal felonies, 8 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of tax evasion, and 2 counts of making false statements to federal agents. It wasn't supposed to be a staged perp walk, but someone leaked the news, and paparazzi were already packed outside the gates. Camera flashes went off constantly as Margaret, dressed in pajamas, with her hands handcuffed in front of her, was escorted out of the multi-million-dollar southern mansion she maintained with stolen funds. A local news anchor noted the sharp contrast, pointing out that 6 months prior, Margaret had accepted an award as Charleston's Philanthropist of the Year, yet now faced up to 20 years in federal prison. The judge set bail at $500,000, which Harrison paid using his personal funds. Her release came with strict conditions, surrendering her passport, 0 contact with foundation staff, and wearing an ankle monitor. Her mugshot went viral online, messy hair, hollow eyes, looking 20 years older than she did at the rehearsal dinner. At 11:04 a.m. on December 15th, Preston sent me a text message stating he knew I didn't want to hear from him, but he needed to thank me for saving the people his mother would have continued to harm if someone hadn't stepped up. I read it, didn't reply, but couldn't bring myself to delete it either. Harrison made good on every single promise he made back at the coffee shop. On December 12th, he wired $5.2 million from his personal inheritance and private accounts directly to the foundation. It was more than enough to cover the deficit Margaret created, and he used the remaining funds to establish the Eleanor Ashford Second Chance Scholarship, specifically targeted at compensating the students who had been unfairly rejected. On December 20th, he officially filed for divorce in Charleston County Family Court, citing an irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. On December 16th, his private attorney released a public statement on his behalf, where Harrison admitted he knew his ex-wife was violating her fiduciary duty, calling himself a coward for staying silent and enjoying a luxury lifestyle funded by stolen money. while promising to spend the rest of his life making amends through full cooperation with federal law enforcement. He moved completely out of the $8.9 million estate and bought a modest two-bedroom condo in West Ashley for $285,000. Outlets began running headlines about his incredible transformation from enabler to ally. On December 18th, Harrison asked to meet me for coffee. Over 20 minutes, the former head of an old money dynasty sat before me in tears, apologizing repeatedly and thanking me. I listened quietly and accepted his apology, but made zero promises regarding a future with Preston. Between December 16, 2025, and January 15, 2026, the Foundation Board manually reevaluated all 156 rejected applications. Wherever possible, we issued acceptance letters and full scholarship offers to every single one of them. Our letter explained that after a complete review of decisions made between 2019 and 2024, the board confirmed their applications were wrongfully denied due to misconduct by a now-removed official, offering our deepest apologies alongside an immediate full scholarship to rectify past wrongs. 68 students wrote back. Some had already graduated from local colleges burdened with heavy debt, while others had abandoned higher education entirely and were struggling in low-wage jobs. For those individuals, we created a specialized alumni support fund to help clear student loans or cover trade school certifications. Ultimately, 64 accepted our compensation, while 4 turned it down, stating they could no longer trust the institution, a reaction I completely understood. The very first reissued scholarship was processed on January 20th, 2026, awarded to Jasmine Rodriguez. The young woman who had been rejected in 2021 and forced to work odd jobs was finally stepping onto the campus at USC. On January 21st, she sent me an email thanking me for standing up for people like her when I didn't have to, acknowledging how hard it was to take on such a powerful family. I printed that email out, put it in a frame, and hung it right on my office wall. As for Preston, he completely vanished from my life for 8 straight months, from the day of the board meeting until July of 2026, with zero contact outside of that single text message. Even so, news about him still reached me. In Charleston's nonprofit circles, word travels fast. He quit his position at the high-end architecture firm because of its deep ties to the Ashford family name, feeling the connection was compromised. Instead, he joined Habitat for Humanity as a full-time, unpaid volunteer, building homes for low-income families. He started intensive therapy twice a week with a specialist focused on family systems and moral injury. By spring, he was even volunteering at Morningstar Scholars, spending Tuesday and Thursday evenings from 4 to 7 tutoring underprivileged high schoolers in math. In March, my staff mentioned him in the break room, noting how hard he worked, how quiet he kept, and how he hadn't missed a single shift in 3 months, asking if I knew him. I calmly replied that I used to. By July, I checked the volunteer logs and saw he had logged 312 service hours. He moved completely out of his family's sphere of influence, renting a small 1-bedroom apartment in Mount Pleasant for $1,400 a month, paying for it entirely out of his modest Habitat stipend, without touching a dime from his trust fund. He was actively rebuilding a completely different life, though I had no idea if it was too little too late. In February 2026, Preston's sister Olivia returned to Charleston. She had been studying abroad in Europe during the rehearsal dinner and subsequent scandal, completely missing the fallout. She called and asked to meet at Kudu Coffee, the very place where Eleanor first tested my resolve. Sitting across from me, the 22-year-old college senior stated she wasn't there to beg for forgiveness for her family, or to make excuses for Preston. She just wanted to tell me in person how brave my actions were and express her sorrow that I had to face all that hostility alone. When I asked why she was telling me this, She shared that she was headed to Georgetown Law on a full scholarship to specialize in nonprofit compliance and governance law, wanting me to know that not everyone in the family shared her mother's arrogance and greed. The determination in her eyes was genuine. We talked for an hour about Eleanor, the future of the foundation, and the cost of accountability. Before leaving, she mentioned that Preston was still consistently sticking with therapy, adding that while she didn't know if it mattered to me anymore, he had become a completely changed person. Unsure how to respond, I simply thanked her for letting me know. Margaret's criminal trial opened in June 2026 at the U.S. District Court in Charleston, lasting 8 full days. Her defense team tried to pin everything on major accounting oversights, claiming low-level bookkeepers forged records, and that Margaret was merely an figurehead president who signed documents without understanding the financial systems. However, federal prosecutors brought overwhelming evidence, detailed forensic accounting reports, irrefutable wire transfers, and my live court testimony. I spent 2 hours on the witness stand, calmly taking the jury through every fake commercial invoice, every wire transfer to Delaware shell companies, and every qualified applicant turned away under the guise of family tradition. Harrison testified for 45 minutes as well. Looking straight past his ex-wife's glare, he publicly admitted he knew what was happening all along, calling himself guilty for staying silent. Prosecutors also called 3 rejected students to deliver victim impact statements, including Jasmine Rodriguez. Tears streamed down Jasmine's face as she explained that instead of becoming a certified teacher that spring, she spent 4 years folding clothes at retail stores for minimum wage, while Margaret used her tuition money for designer clothing. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning a unanimous verdict: guilty on 11 of the 13 felony counts. Sentencing was set for August. Under federal guidelines, Margaret was sentenced to 78 months in federal prison, 6.5 years, and ordered to pay $4.8 million in full restitution, followed by 3 years of supervised release. The judge ordered her to report to FPC Alderson in West Virginia by September 15th. During sentencing, the judge delivered a harsh reprimand, stating that Margaret held a position of extreme trust, with vast resources meant for the most vulnerable, yet chose to steal from underprivileged students out of endless greed, adding that such a total betrayal of public trust demanded significant prison time. Preston attended the sentencing, sitting alongside Harrison rather than on his mother's side of the courtroom. As federal marshals handcuffed Margaret and led her out, she turned to glance at Preston, hoping for a shred of sympathy. But he turned his head away and avoided her gaze, finally making a clear choice. By July 2026, 18 months had passed since that disastrous rehearsal dinner. One afternoon, I made an unscheduled site visit to the Morningstar Scholars headquarters. Across the main hall, I saw Preston sitting with a student, patiently walking through algebra equations on a notepad. He looked up, and our eyes met across the room. Neither of us walked over, but in that quiet moment, the atmosphere shifted. There was an unspoken understanding that we had both survived the storm and were still actively working towards something better. Perhaps, somewhere down the line, we would need to sit down and actually talk. On August 14, 2026, Morningstar Scholars announced a major expansion. Using recovered foundation funds and a wave of public donations from the past 6 months, we set up new chapters in Atlanta, Charlotte, and Richmond. With a $6.2 million budget over 3 years, the expansion meant supporting 68 additional students every single year. At the public press conference, I delivered a speech highlighting Eleanor Ashford's belief in the life-changing power of education, noting that the expansion would give dozens more students the exact same life-changing opportunity I received, serving as Eleanor's true lasting legacy. Preston stood in the very back row listening quietly, leaving before the reception without trying to approach me, but he was there. On August 20th, a week later, the receptionist handed me a letter with my name on the envelope, containing a single page of neat handwriting from Preston. Orch. He wrote that while he had no right to ask, he hoped to buy me a cup of coffee, to share what he had learned over the past year and a half. He explicitly clarified he wasn't begging for forgiveness or asking to get back together, but simply wanted to say the words he should have spoken 18 months ago. Orch. He added that if I refused or never wanted to see him again, he completely understood, but if there was even a tiny chance, he would be waiting at Kudu Coffee the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. for 1 hour. I read through the note 3 times. Instead of deciding right away, I asked myself what Eleanor would want me to do, and more importantly, what I actually wanted. Orch. On August 27, 2026 at 4 p.m. sharp, I pushed open the door to Kudu Coffee. Preston was already sitting there, clearly having arrived early, with a cold, untouched cup of black coffee in front of him. Seeing me walk in, he stood up quickly, visibly nervous and unsure of himself. I took a seat across from him, and he sat down as well. We sat in silence for nearly a full minute. Orch. He finally broke the silence, thanking me for coming and admitting he didn't think I would show up. I admitted I almost didn't, but expressed gladness that I came, prompting him to share what was on his mind. Orch. He took a deep breath and confessed that when he should have protected me, he acted like a coward and caved, betraying both me and what was right just to protect family image and avoid conflict. Orch. Looking me dead in the eye, he shared that he had spent 18 months trying to understand how he became that person through therapy, manual labor on construction sites, and stepping away from all his privilege. Orch. He explained that he had been raised to believe family loyalty meant protecting the family name at all costs, but I had taught him that real loyalty meant holding the line against wrongdoing, even if it cost everything. He looked completely different, much leaner, wearing plain jeans and a faded t-shirt instead of high-end tailored shirts, with light stubble on his chin. Orch. He was no longer the untouchable heir, but someone grounded and real. His voice trembled as he acknowledged he couldn't erase his past cowardice, but pledged to spend the rest of his life proving he would never cave again, clarifying he wasn't asking for forgiveness yet, but simply wanted me to know he had changed and would be there if I ever gave him a chance to prove it. Orch. I listened to every word without interrupting. When he finished, I looked at him and quietly admitted I wasn't sure if I could ever trust him again. He offered a sad smile and acknowledged he didn't expect immediate trust. Silence settled over us again, but this time it felt manageable. Orch. Looking at his cold coffee cup, I suggested we start simply with coffee every Tuesday at 4 p.m. to talk, and see where things went from there. His eyes lit up instantly with relief and hope as he nodded heavily and agreed. For 5 straight months, from September through January, we met every Tuesday at 4 p.m. at that exact same table. Orch. We talked about everything: his therapy progress, his volunteer work on job sites, his efforts to make things right, my work at Morningstar Scholars, the students returning to school, and memories of Eleanor. Slowly and carefully, broken trust began to rebuild on top of the old ruins. Orch. In December, during our 16th coffee date, Preston mentioned telling his therapist that he wasn't sure if I would ever forgive him. When I asked what the therapist said, Preston shared that earning forgiveness shouldn't be the end goal. Instead, the focus had to be actively proving the kind of person he had become. I took a sip of my coffee and asked what kind of person he had become. Orch. He looked up with absolute certainty and stated he was someone who wouldn't hesitate to stand up for me, even if it meant losing everything else. On January 20th, 2027, instead of getting coffee, we went for a walk along Waterfront Park, the exact spot where we collided over a cup of water 3.5 years prior. We walked side by side in comfortable silence for a while. Orch. Preston stopped and asked if there could ever be a future for us, if he consistently proved through his actions that he had truly changed. I didn't answer right away. My mind raced through memories of Eleanor, my mother, Jasmine Rodriguez, and the 155 students we brought back from despair, reflecting on what was truly worth fighting for and rebuilding. I turned to face him and explained that I didn't need a flawless saint, just someone brave, needing absolute certainty that if we ever faced another moment like that rehearsal dinner, where choosing me meant giving up comfort and facing public backlash, he would stand up for me without hesitation. He turned toward me with zero hesitation in his eyes, giving his word that he would spend his entire life proving it to me. We stood in White Point Garden, right beside the bench where he had proposed back in 2024. I smiled slightly and suggested we keep meeting for coffee to see where the path led us. There was no kiss, no hug, and no holding hands. We simply sat together on that bench, separated by a foot of space, connected in spirit. That was more than enough. By February 2027, the wall of photos at the Morningstar Scholars headquarters featured 224 smiling faces, including the 64 students whose futures we managed to recover after Margaret's actions. One evening after staff had left, I stood alone in front of the wall. Preston had just finished his evening volunteer shift and walked over to stand quietly beside me. We stood together in silence, looking at the faces and the restored futures. He softly broke the quiet, noting that Eleanor would be proud. I agreed, adding that he had helped finish what she started. Looking back at him, I noted that we accomplished it together because he was right there beside me. He gave a self-deprecating laugh, noting it was only because I was willing to give him a chance to earn his place back step by step. Right in the center of the wall, we had added a new photo of Eleanor Ashford, mounted above a brass plaque bearing her name, her years, and a note honoring her as the founder whose spirit lived on forever. Preston wore a standard volunteer badge that read simply Preston, omitting the prominent Ashford last name by his own choice. We stood side by side, looking into Eleanor's knowing eyes. That was what real redemption looked like. Not a flawless fairy tale ending or erasing past wrongs, but day in, day out commitment, filling every void left behind, and slowly earning back trust over time. Falling in love a second time wasn't about perfection. It was about rebuilding genuine trust out of hardship. Preston was still on that journey to fully earn back that trust, and perhaps one day it would be enough to leave the past behind completely. For now, that was plenty. We had our Tuesday 4 p.m. coffee dates and a wall filled with smiling faces. Constant reminders that an honest soul carries far more weight than comfort or status ever could. Eleanor had understood that all along, and now we finally did too.